Good morning or afternoon to everyone, and thank you all for joining what I think is going to be a really informative webinar. My name is Steve Sutherland. I am the manager for the Indigenous Caucus, the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. Before we begin, I just want to say that I hope you're all keeping really healthy and safe during these times we live in right now. And I just want to offer my thanks to everyone for all of their hard work, ensuring that the people we serve can also be kept healthy and safe. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are incredibly lucky to serve our communities on Indigenous territory across the country. I know that many of us feel an obligation to our respective communities, and I just want to say how admirable I find it when many of us come together to discuss new and innovative ways to continue the work that we do. My apologies that none of you can see me right now. As you're all experiencing, life in quarantine is not the easiest. And when your technology stops working the day before presenting a webinar, unfortunately, can't fix things too quickly. I am glad, however, to be here in voice with all of you today. For our webinar, I'd like to welcome our presenters who'll be sharing some of the initiatives they've taken on and look to take on in the future. So we have Romy Bowers, Senior Vice President, Client Solutions, Lindsay Neeley, Director, Housing Solutions, Indigenous in the North, and Alison Bastien, Senior Manager, Prioritization and Intake Allocation, Housing Solutions, Indigenous and the North. Before I pass it off to Romy, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is in real time. You should be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or through your telephone if you've chosen to dial in. You should all be currently muted. We do this to minimize background noise. If you wish to ask questions, you can type them in the chat box on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation, and then we will answer your questions at the end of the webinar with time permitting. So with that, I will pass it off to Romy.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining you virtually today, and I hope everyone can see me and hear me okay. If not, please indicate in the text. I want to thank the CHRA Indigenous Caucus for hosting the webinar, and I also want to give you a little bit of a summary of the format. I have some prepared remarks, as does Lindsay and also Alison. So if you could give us about 10 minutes to go through those prepared remarks. And then after that point, we will open up for questions, and we welcome any questions that you have on anything that that involves CMHC and the federal government. We may not be able to answer everything, but we'll get back to you with the answers. So I wanted to take this opportunity to update you on how CMHC is supporting Canadians and our financial stability during these unprecedented times. Je suis heureuse d'avoir cette occasion de faire le point avec vous sur ce que la CHL fait pour aider les Canadiens et soutenir notre stabilité financière durant cette période sans précédent. COVID has truly given a new meaning to the old saying, there's no place like home, and I'm sure you guys are all very cognizant of this. As Canadians do their part to contain the spread of the virus and flatten the curve, home has become a sanctuary, a place of safety and refuge in these challenging times. And I know that as housing providers in working with clients directly, that you're doing amazing work to support this. So thank you. I wanted to also note that CMHC, we are working very closely with our federal partners, and we have implemented a number of measures to mitigate the impact of COVID through what we like to think of as a whole of government approach. Nous travaillons de près avec nos partenaires fédéraux et nous avons pris un certain nombre de mesures pour atténuer l'impact de la COVID-19 grâce à une approche pan-gouvernementale. There are a number of tools offered by the Government of Canada as part of the Economic Response Plan, which includes money to help address the immediate needs of communities and help our most vulnerable citizens pay their rent and put food on the table. Certains utiles sont offerts par le gouvernement du Canada dans le cadre du plan d'intervention économique. Ce plan prévoit des fonds pour aider à répondre aux besoins immédiats dans les collectivités et pour aider les personnes les plus vulnérables à payer le loyer et à se nourrir. There are some targeted supports available to help Indigenous communities and organizations respond to the COVID crisis. So I'm going to just describe these in a little bit of detail. First, the Indigenous Community Support Fund. The Government of Canada is providing $305 million through a distinctions-based Indigenous Community Support Fund to address immediate needs in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation communities. Of this investment, $15 million is dedicated to Indigenous organizations providing critical services to Indigenous peoples in urban centers off reserve. Support for Indigenous businesses. The government announced $306 million in funding to help small and medium-sized Indigenous businesses and to support Aboriginal financial institutions that offer financings to these businesses across Canada. Now looking at government programs related to housing related issues. First, reaching home. In order to ensure that the homeless sector has the tools and interventions they need to respond to the pandemic, the Government of Canada is investing $157.5 million under the Reaching Home Canada's Homelessness Strategy. This funding is available through Employment and Social Development Canada. Vers un chez-soi pour s'assurer que le secteur de l'aide aux sans-abri a les outils et la capacité d'intervention nécessaires pour réagir à la COVID-19, le gouvernement du Canada investit 165,5 millions de dollars dans le programme Vers un chez-soi, sa stratégie de lutte contre l'itinérance. Ce financement est offert par l'entremise d'emploi et développement social Canada. Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program, and this is a relatively new program that was announced by the Prime Minister earlier this week. Under this program, the federal government will work with provinces and territories in delivery to help small businesses that have been adversely affected by the pandemic. This support will also be available to nonprofits and charitable organizations as well. We are working very hard to finalize the details of this program, and we will share the information to you through the CHRA as soon as we have more operational details to share. Et en français, aide d'urgence du Canada pour le loyer commercial. Le gouvernement fédéral travaillerait avec les provinces et les territoires pour remettre en œuvre ce programme afin d'aider les petites entreprises touchées par la COVID-19. Cette aide sera aussi offerte aux organismes sans but lucratif et organismes de bienfaisance. Nous mettons la dernière main au programme et communiquerons les détails dès qu'ils seront disponibles. In terms of Cmhc measures for nonprofit housing providers, I just wanted to state in the first instance that we understand that this is an extremely difficult time, and there are a number of different circumstances that may impact your ability to provide housing solutions for Canadians. And we have, as I think we've talked about in previous calls with the CHRA, but just to repeat, we have already announced that we are implementing the following flexibilities. Federal Community Housing Initiative Phase 2. As many of you may have already heard, the launch date of this initiative has been delayed from April 1st to September 1st, 2020, in recognition of the extraordinary circumstances of the pandemic. This means that the current levels of financial assistance will be maintained until August to allow time for eligible housing providers to sign the necessary agreements. We are extending legacy program subsidies for those agreements that are expiring between now and the new launch date to avoid any interruption in the funding of these subsidies. With respect to flexibilities for operating agreements and their requirements, we recognize that there are significant operating challenges faced by housing providers during this time. And I wanted you to all know that CMHC will not penalize housing providers for late or outstanding reports, such as things like, financial statements or other budget-related reports. And in addition, to ensure that there is a steady flow of funding, CMHC will not initiate new subsidy suspensions due to any breaches of existing agreements. And physical condition reviews are now very limited in terms of what's taking place in the field, or they've been suspended temporarily, entirely. With respect to loan payment deferral, as you guys have probably all heard as well, CMHC will consider providing up to 6 months of loan payment deferral, and this includes payment of principal and interest for borrowers who have a CMHC finance loan in good standing. La SCHL peut permettre aux emprunteurs ayant un prêt en règle financière par la SCHL de reporter jusqu'à 6 mois de paiement de capital et des intérêts. We have said previously that we expect housing providers exercising this option to act compassionately and extend the support to renters and households so that their housing needs continue to be met. And we've been communicating this message to all our clients, including our financial institution clients. I just wanted to state that housing providers, again, have such an important role to play in preserving our economy during these very difficult times. And we want to support you because we believe that we're truly all in this together. And please rest assured that we're prepared to be very flexible in exploring all solutions that are available to CMHC to ensure that you can help provide housing security and affordability to all your members. So please reach out to us with any questions that you have. And just in closing, in terms of my remarks, I just wanted to say that at CMHC, we're working really hard on trying to be client-centric and understanding your needs and working with you in a way that makes sense for the best interest of Canadians. And we really appreciate any feedback that you have about our operations and our programs. And I just wanted you to know that we're absolutely committed to working in partnership with you. We recognize that core housing need is higher among Indigenous households, and that you are facing tremendous challenges in terms of addressing these housing challenges. And we have heard from Indigenous governance communities and housing providers that housing is a top concern. And as you know, our 2030 goal is to make sure that all Canadians, and in particular those in our Indigenous communities, have the housing that meets their needs and that is affordable. So despite all the challenges of the COVID crisis, we're committed to working with you to make sure that we achieve our 2030 aspiration. Nous savons que pour nous approcher de notre objectif de 2030, nous devons travailler différemment avec nos partenaires et essayer de nouvelles approches originales pour commencer à combler l'écart dans les conditions de logement des Autochtones. We see a huge opportunity to collaborate with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis partners to achieve positive, lasting change during and beyond this crisis. So with that, I'd like to pass the microphone over virtually to Lindsay Neeley. So over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks very much, Romy. I hope everybody can see and hear me okay. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you and look forward to meeting the rest of you in person at some point when circumstances change, but a pleasure to join you virtually today. So thanks very much for the opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new Indigenous and Northern Housing Solutions team at CMHC and some of the programs that we continue to offer under the National Housing Strategy to support the housing needs of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples across the country. And important to note that we do continue to offer these programs during the crisis, as we know that the needs are pressing, and as Romy said, that core housing need is higher among Indigenous households. And we know that to get closer to the 2030 aspiration that we've committed ourselves to at CMHC, that we will need to work differently with new and existing partners and try some new and innovative things to start closing the gap in Indigenous housing outcomes. And so that's why we have a new team that I have the privilege of leading at CMHC. It's called Indigenous and Northern Housing Solutions. And our job is really to help advance projects and partnerships that serve the housing needs of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples across Canada and in the territories. And we're a team of about 70 specialists located all across the country who work directly with Indigenous communities, organizations, and housing providers to help navigate all of our products and service offerings, which includes everything from mortgage loan insurance for single-family homes and multi-unit projects, as well as the full suite of National Housing Strategy funding and financing programs. And a key change that we made this past year at CMHC to deliver a better client service and to support more housing projects that serve the needs of Indigenous and Northern communities was to establish a new delivery team that manages the intake, review, prioritization, and commitment of funding for National Housing Strategy programs. Alison leads this team, and she'll be talking more about some of the projects we've been supporting a bit later in the webinar. Donc, grâce à cette réorganisation, nos ressources sont mieux orientées pour travailler en partenariat avec les organismes autochtones pour bâtir des relations afin de mieux comprendre les besoins particuliers et, en fin de compte, pour trouver des solutions aux problèmes uniques du logement. And so I'll just turn now to talk a little bit about the various initiatives that are available to Indigenous and Northern communities under the National Housing Strategy. This is something we had planned to do with you at the Indigenous Caucus meeting at the CHRA Congress that had been planned for earlier this month. And so very happy to have the opportunity today to provide a quick highlight of the key initiatives, but would very much encourage everybody to visit the CMHC website or the Place to Call Home website, which is really dedicated to the National Housing Strategy, for more details on all of the initiatives, because I will just speak briefly about them today. I would assume that many of you are already familiar with the national strategy itself. CHRA had played a key role in helping develop the strategy itself more than a few years ago now. It is a 10-year, $55 billion plan launched in 2017, and it's really designed to help improve housing outcomes for all Canadians, regardless of where they live. Improving Indigenous housing outcomes is a priority for the strategy overall, and there are a number of new programs available to all Indigenous housing providers. And there are specific targets within the strategy to be sure that there are adequate investments in underserved populations or groups. And so there's a focus on shelters, seniors, women and children, persons with disabilities, and of course the priority overall for supporting the needs of Indigenous peoples. First, I'll talk about the kind of the signature initiative of the strategy, which is the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. And this program offers capital contributions and low-cost loans with up to $13.2 billion available to build new affordable housing supply and to repair and renew existing affordable and community housing supply. And under this fund, all projects that are serving First Nations, Inuit, or Métis people or involving partnerships with Indigenous governments or organizations are prioritized. And the intent of this program is really to cover a broad range of housing needs, from shelters to transitional housing, community housing, to affordable rental and affordable home ownership. There are some minimum requirements that we look for in terms of project applications coming in for the co-investment fund, and these include partnerships, financial viability, affordability, where 30% of the units must be less than 80% of the median market rent for the area for 20 years, which is a higher standard than we had had in previous existing programs, but really trying to incent a more affordable, sustainable housing stock for the future. That's why there are also minimum requirements for energy efficiency, in terms of reduction in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as accessibility requirements, so that they're meeting the standards and the needs of an aging population. Overall, about 10 to 15% of the projects we have funded and that we have seen come in under the National Housing Co-Investment Fund are Indigenous and Northern community-driven projects. We are working hard to improve our processes based on some feedback from clients, and so that we can build on that momentum, and Alison will talk a little bit more about this later. The second initiative I was going to touch on is the Rental Construction Financing Initiative. And this is a direct lending program that offers CMHC insured low-cost loans to finance the construction of new rental housing across Canada, with a focus on urban areas where there are some pressing supply challenges. In total, there's about $14 billion in loans available, with the goal of supporting the construction of 42,500 new rental units across the country over the next 10 years. Similar to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, there are some minimum requirements for affordability, energy efficiency, and accessibility, but they're not quite as strict. For example, the affordability requirement under the Rental Construction Financing Initiative is that 20% of the units must be at 30% of the median household income for that area for 10 years. So really trying to incent and focus on urban areas where the supply challenges are quite pressing, and there is that really urgent need for new affordable rental supply. And we have seen a lot of interest in the Rental Construction Financing Initiative among Indigenous and Northern communities, particularly Indigenous organizations that hold urban parcels of land and are looking to develop them for affordable housing and longer-term socioeconomic benefit for their members. Third is the Affordable Housing Innovation Fund. This is a 5-year program that launched in 2016 with up to $200 million available in loans and contributions. The intention of this fund is to encourage new funding models and innovative building techniques in the rental housing market, and working to support some unique ideas that are coming forward that will help revolutionize the affordable housing sector in the future. So really focused on innovation and testing new concepts. There's also the Federal Lands Initiative, which launched in 2018, a 10-year program. Under the Federal Lands Initiative, CMHC works with other federal departments to transfer surplus federal lands and buildings to eligible participants at discounted or no cost to support the development of affordable, sustainable, accessible, and socially inclusive housing. And so how it works is that federal property owners that have surplus buildings or properties that follow the existing directives and policies that are in place for disposal of surplus federal properties, including any due diligence that needs to take place. But now with the Federal Lands Initiative, federal property owners are required to assess that surplus property for use as affordable housing. And there is a pre-screening assessment tool that's been developed to help guide partners involved in this process. And I thought I'd mention, we just posted actually a request for interest on our website for a property that's become available in Thunder Bay, Ontario. So if you're interested in that, encourage you to check out our website. So turning to support for existing providers and existing agreements, many of you are already familiar with phase 2 of the Federal Community Housing Initiative. Romy already mentioned that we have delayed the launch until September 1st due to the impact of COVID-19. And essentially phase 2 is focused on providing support for community housing providers with expiring operating agreements under federal administration to ensure that they're able to continue offering affordable housing to low-income households in need. And of course, we know this is very important for Indigenous families who rely on the existing community housing stock to meet their needs. Also important to note that there's transitional funding available through the Federal Community Housing Initiative Phase 2 and a new Community Housing Resource Center and Sector Transformation Fund that are available to support community housing providers as they transition to Phase 2. Both the Resource Center and Sector Transformation Fund are delivered by a third party, not by CMHC, but important to note that they are there to support community housing providers as they continue to offer affordable housing to households in need. Part of the National Housing Strategy also includes new bilateral agreements with provinces and territories, and this involves delivery of billions of dollars in new funding to address local priorities and components of a new federal, provincial, territorial partnership framework, and new programs including the Canada Community Housing Initiative and a Northern Housing Fund and a new Canada Housing Benefit to support greater affordability. There also is $225 million that was set aside for urban Indigenous community housing projects. And of this, $200 million is delivered by provinces and territories through bilateral agreements, and $25 million is set aside within the National Housing Co-Investment Fund for federally administered housing stock. And this is really intended to support urban Indigenous providers to protect affordability for Indigenous families and to preserve the existing housing stock in good condition. And then I'll just touch briefly on some research and data initiatives in case that's of interest to the group. We have a number of initiatives, including solution labs, which help to bring together experts and housing stakeholders to incubate and scale potential solutions to housing affordability pressures. We have a demonstration initiative, which supports forward-looking technologies, practices, programs, and strategies that show what's possible for the future of housing in Canada. There's a collaborative housing research network that was just launched late last year by CMHC, and that's really a countrywide collaboration of academics and community partners that connect virtually to support research that informs housing policy decision making. And then there are a number of other research and planning funds, awards, and a scholarship program that are offered by CMHC to support impactful housing research, building new expertise in the housing sector, and partner projects that align with the vision and goals of the National Housing Strategy. Just quickly too, and then I promise I'm also almost at the end, there are two new home ownership programs, that through the National Housing Strategy that launched last year. And we are seeing a growing interest from Indigenous partners in these two new programs. The first is a first-time homebuyer incentive, which is a shared equity mortgage program that makes it easier for new homeowners to purchase a home with a minimum down payment of 5% and still access a lower mortgage payment. The government provides 5 or 10% towards the down payment on a new home, or 5% on an existing home. And as I mentioned, that's really designed to help new homeowners access affordable home ownership. And then the second is a shared equity mortgage providers fund, which supports new and existing shared equity mortgage providers. There are two streams to that fund. The first is for eligible pre-construction costs for new housing projects where a shared equity mortgage will be provided to a first-time home buyer. And then the other part of the fund provides loans to shared equity mortgage providers so that they can offer shared equity mortgages directly to first-time home buyers. So really two programs designed to help support on the affordable home ownership side, which balances a little bit out with the National Housing Strategy programs overall, which are really focused on affordable rental supply. So to sum it up, we're changing our business at CMHC to be more client-centric and focused on helping our partners navigate all of the funding and financing tools available to build more affordable housing to meet the needs of their members and Indigenous households. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Alison to share some of the progress we've made in supporting urban Indigenous housing projects, in particular through the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. Over to you, Alison.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we have made quite a bit of great progress so far through the NHS programs, and we're eager to do more. There's a lot of great files in the pipeline right now, and I'll walk you through some of those active applications as well as some results. So Nous avons réalisé de grands progrès jusqu'à présent, mais nous voulons faire encore plus. So in terms of take-up thus far, since 2019, we've had 76 new applications from Indigenous and Northern clients across NHS programs. That represents about 134 units for Northern projects under the co-investment fund, which is represents 18.5 million, and that's 295 units or $16.2 million for Indigenous projects, which are not in the North. And so when we talk about Northern projects, we're strictly referring to the 3 territories. In terms of the types of projects through 2019, we supported the creation of new seniors residences, transitional housing and shelters, affordable housing and home ownership as well. And we've invested in different types of projects across the country. And some of those examples include a 24-unit addition to an existing affordable housing project in Toronto, and that was about 103 existing units. So that one had a rooftop terrace and a 4-season greenhouse. And so that was for Indigenous seniors and with home care services next door. So that one was great. There is a 38-unit project in Vernon, BC that has studio, 1-bedroom, 2 and 3-bedroom units, which supports Indigenous elders and people living with accessibility challenges, as well as families living off reserve. We also supported an 8-unit modular housing project in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, and that one provides affordable rental housing in the north where there's an extreme shortage of housing options. And one of our RCFI projects to note is 120 units of affordable rental, and that one's located in West Bank near Kelowna. And that was a collaboration between Quadra Homes, which met local needs with a mix of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. So in terms of what we have in the pipeline for 2020, a lot of projects that are supporting affordable housing and we're looking to try a more focused approach where we can for portfolio style applications where certain nonprofit organizations or municipalities are looking to put forward several different projects as kind of a combined approach. And we're certainly prioritizing projects for marginalized and vulnerable groups, specifically seniors, women, and girls. And so a couple of interesting examples relating to seniors projects are one is a 128-unit project in Ontario that services Indigenous seniors or will serve Indigenous seniors, and that one's with the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. And then a second example is a 31-unit project in collaboration with BC Housing near Kamloops. And that one is pretty neat because it provides supportive housing for youth as they age out of care, but it also will co-house elders with the youth to create that community support network and develop traditional elder-youth relationships. So our new team in Indigenous and Northern housing is working hard to co-develop solutions with Indigenous housing providers because we know that the distinct needs are there and we really want to be able to support our clients in taking advantage of the full funding and financing options available. Notre nouvelle équipe de solutions de logement pour les Autochtones et le Nord travaille fort pour trouver conjointement des solutions avec les fournisseurs de logements autochtones. L'objectif est de répondre aux besoins particuliers et de tirer pleinement avantage des fonds et des options de financement disponibles. We've also heard the feedback on our process and our application, and we've certainly heard you in terms of some of the things that are more difficult and not going so well, and we are implementing some changes thanks to that. So, nous avons bien reçu les commentaires sur le processus et les demandes. Nous vous avons entendu et nous procédons à certains changements. So these changes will allow us to better set expectations, provide transparency into our process, and process applications as efficiently as possible. Ces changements nous permettront de mieux définir les attentes, d'être plus transparents dans nos processus et de traiter les demandes des clients les plus efficacement possible. A key change is that our client solutions specialists will now work more closely with our clients to prepare their applications upfront. So specialists will support clients in gathering documentation and information in advance of application submission. Our client solutions specialists will be able to act as an advisor and provide guidance to ensure applications can be properly assessed once they're submitted. And just note that this change does not affect program eligibility requirements. And for clients who've already submitted an application and have been prioritized, your assigned financial solutions specialist will communicate any impacts. So if there are impacts, then certainly you'll be aware. We're also looking to further improve our internal processes by looking for ways to match our review more appropriately with the different types of projects, so that in some cases we can reduce our underwriting for deals that are deemed to be of lower risk, and we might be a little bit more efficient in those underwriting by reducing some of those practices. Further implementing feedback we've received, we're revamping the website. We've streamlined it to cater the type of information you're searching for, and we have helpful pro tips, simplified language, and added guidance on timelines. We're also reviewing the application itself to streamline and reduce burden where we can, and you'll be informed as more enhancements occur and as more tools are provided to support you through this process. So that's all I have in terms of progress thus far and what we're working on. And now I'd like to open the floor for questions. As we mentioned earlier, if we can't answer them, we'll take them back certainly and provide a written response to everyone.
All right, so excuse me. So thank you all for joining us today. I know I certainly appreciate the working relationship that we've been able to develop with CMHC, particularly on the urban Indigenous file that we at the CHRA take so seriously, and I really look forward to continuing that working relationship with all of you. We do have a question here. So from Matthew McDonald, they are wondering about reaching home funding in the Indigenous homeless stream, particularly in Atlantic Canada. Does anybody want to tackle that one? Or my understanding is it's more of an ESDC program, so we can always also go back and get more information as well.
Yeah, and thank you for the question, Matt. Yeah, so Employment and Social Development Canada is the lead federal department for the Reaching Home program and the delivery of the new funding in response to COVID. So we'd be happy to connect you with an official at ESDC to help answer the specific questions you have about it and how it might be working in the Atlantic.
Perfect. Thanks, Lindsay. Another question here from Sharon. Have you seen any projects that address housing that includes a partnership with Child and Family Services?
Yeah, Child and Family Services, I can't think of any specific projects that would be funded through Child and Family Services, although of course working with provinces and municipalities hand in hand. I can't think of any off the top of my head that are partnering specifically with Child and Family Services though. I don't know, Lindsay, if you have any.
Not off the top of my head, but what we could do is come back with some specific projects if we have. I know that we do try to prioritize housing projects that have support services on site, recognizing how important the wraparound services are, particularly when housing Indigenous families or Indigenous women and children. So we certainly try to support those projects wherever we can. But yeah, we can go back to the list and see what's in the pipeline to see if there's anything specific we could point to and come back to you on that.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Louise asks if you could give an example where 2 or 3 NHS components have been combined to make a project more viable.
The project that I spoke to in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, did have funding from the Innovation Fund and the Co-Investment Fund. I don't know, Lindsay, did you touch on the Innovation Fund? Perhaps not, but we do fund, we do stack our programs, and so that option is available, and typically look at it at a case-by-case basis to make sure that the right amount of funding works for the project. But in particular with our Indigenous clients, we're looking to make sure that that we can adapt to the need of the client, so that we're always looking to see how we can navigate through the programs to make sure that, and so that's why we're often looking to bring different programs together to make them work.
Just as a general comment, just on that question, like we're very open to this concept of stacking, and the way we're approaching our philosophy at approaching this is that we feel that for our Indigenous clients and communities in the North, that we want to use all the tools that CMHC has at our disposal to help you. So our view is not fitting a particular client with a specific program, but making sure that you have an understanding of all the tools, and we want to try to understand the particular problem or challenge of a particular project, and our philosophy is try to help out as much as possible. And because we have people in the regions on the ground, we also try to share our learnings about different programs that may exist at the municipal and provincial level as well. So, you know, again, there's each project is unique, and the solutions don't always work for every project, but our goal is to really try to understand your need and try to be as helpful as possible.
Perfect, thank you. Sharon asked, what is the average timeline from application to receiving funding?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that, as I spoke to earlier in terms of the improvements that we're looking to reduce, it can take up to 12 to 18 months to receive funding to be realistic. In particular, if projects come to us at the very early stages, we often provide funding for things like environmental site assessments and a lot of those pre-construction requirements. So, yeah, it can take some time, but we do have detailed explanation of all of our timelines available on our website. So I'd encourage people to go and take a look at that, and just, you know, keep the lines of communication open with our specialists who can walk you through the process at each stage and each milestone.
Perfect, thank you. Darlene has asked, and this might be more of a very specific question to their situation, is that they had an agreement end in 2015, and will there be new programs available to bring units back under some type of program?
So I think the best person to answer this is Veronique. I don't know, Veronique, if you're still on the line, if you could provide a response, that would be great. So maybe on this one, we will get back to you on that. If we could just take this question away, and then we'll provide a written response. So my apologies about that.
Sure thing. So Sharon had another question here. This is a good one. So Reaching Home doesn't address homelessness on reserve. Can you give an example of any projects on reserve to address homelessness?
Yeah, we have had a few shelter projects on reserve, and we've We've also been working with communities on transitional housing. So again, it's hard for me to think of a specific one on the spot, I guess, but certainly a lot of our projects are dealing with transitional housing and understanding that need is there. It's definitely something that we come across quite frequently, and so that's an example I could get together for you.
Perfect. Emma asks, will there be a formal evaluation of NHS programs in relation to COVID-19 due to increases in housing need across the board?
I think the answer to this is yes. I think as you know, as part of the NHS, there's a natural review of the effectiveness of NHS programs as every 3 years as part of the natural course. I think the first reviews is going to happen next year, but COVID has changed our world quite dramatically, and my belief is that as we do a review of the NHS programs, we have to actually look at the new landscape created by COVID. I'm still a little bit of an optimist at heart. I'm hoping that with all the efforts that we're making, that maybe the impacts will not be as severe as some of the worst case scenarios note, but we definitely will need to look at all our programs and make adjustments so that we best meet the needs of the Canadians that we serve.
Romy, as a follow-up, is there a way that service providers can give input into this review?
Sorry, I'm having problems changing my mute button as well. So yes, we I think I'm going to let Patricia talk about the stocktake process for NHS, but so there's a formal process, but you're always welcome to provide CMHC direct feedback as well. But I think it's probably best to talk to. I think I should let Patricia talk about the formal process for providing feedback on NHS programs.
Yeah, well, we're really always happy to take that feedback in. I think that's really important for us to hear that. It's really we're continuously looking internally to see how we can make the process better, but also how we can think about any more substantive program or policy changes in the future, as we know that the world around us is never static, and so we always appreciate that. That feedback. We know it's also important to our minister's office to hear from our stakeholders. So we don't have a formal other process quite in place at this time, other than when there's certain times during pre-budget, for example, but on an ongoing basis, we're very happy to take your suggestions, whether it's program improvements or other policy ideas, because we do certainly use that to inform our policy and also our research agenda.
And as Alison indicated, like to the things that are within our control, within CMHC's operations, we try to act on your feedback. And some of the examples that Alison gave are examples of things that came directly from the feedback that we received from CHRA members. So thank you for that.
And I'd add too, please don't hesitate to reach out at any time to any of the to the Indigenous and Northern Housing Specialists for the region that you're located in. There is a list on our website. Happy to take feedback on application processes or any of the programs, and we do take that feedback seriously and have the ability to track it internally and make sure that we follow up. So definitely encourage you to reach out to have a chat with one of the Indigenous housing specialists if you have some questions or have some feedback to provide.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody, for those answers. We have a question from Beverly. This one's also on reaching home, so we may have to get back to them on this question. But under the reaching home guidelines, it states that designated communities and Indigenous homelessness stream recipients may now fund sub-projects located outside of traditional service boundaries. Do you know if this would include First Nation communities within your region, given it's also intended to meet the needs of off-reserve Indigenous people?
So Steve, I think that might be a question we'll need to take back to
Okay.
ESDC, just in terms of the Reaching Home strategy itself. We do have regular calls with ESDC and with other federal departments, not just as we monitor the impact of COVID on Indigenous communities and organizations, but also just generally in the implementation of the National Housing Strategy. So happy to connect you with them, or to follow up on the questions that we received today that couldn't answer, just so that you get the correct responses.
Yeah, and this is a good learning for us. I think next time we'll try to get ESDC on the line, you know, because we're happy to talk about their programs at a high level, but I think it's probably most helpful for your members to have them directly on the line. So we'll take a note of that and make sure that we have them on the line next time.
Absolutely. I appreciate you folks taking on the questions at the same time to ESDC. Does anybody have any other questions? Because see, that is the last one that I've had entered. Okay, so Louise has a question. So Louise works on the CHRA Indigenous Caucus Working Group. So the question is, are you familiar with the CHRA's Indigenous Caucus efforts to obtain a dedicated urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy? And I know, Lindsay, we've discussed it a couple times. I guess what Louise is looking for is your thoughts, particularly on how this would greatly help retain units that have expired, and how this would be done through a for Indigenous by Indigenous approach.
Yeah, and Patricia may wish to add, but you know, my thoughts are that I appreciate CHRA's efforts and on the research front to better understand the gaps that might exist, both for the needs of the existing community housing stock, which is really important to serve Indigenous households, but then also you know, the new housing that's required, the new supply to address the growing demands. Also, the Indigenous Caucus is likely aware that HUMA has also decided to study the needs of urban, rural, northern Indigenous peoples within the course of their work, and so really look forward to seeing what the outcomes are of that study and the work that's ongoing. There is, of course, a commitment in our minister's mandate letter as well to support the federal government efforts in exploring what a fourth strategy would look like. But nothing new to update on today, just to say that we appreciate the work that the Indigenous Caucus has done in bringing attention to this really important issue, and that we look forward to sharing more whenever we can.
Perfect, thanks, Lindsay. Matthew had another question there. Could you please repeat the 200 million, 25 million allocation and where this would have went in PEI? I'm not, Matthew, would you be able to elaborate a little further specifically on that 200 million, 25 million allocation?
We can take this question away if you want. It sounds quite detailed, but we can. I think we don't have the allocation information offhand, but we can certainly make inquiries if that's the request.
Okay, yeah, Matthew, if that's okay with you, we'll take that one away and we'll get back to you with that one.
Yeah, sorry, I was waiting to unmute myself. I thought you'd put the question back to the person asking the question, just about clarifying whether it was specific to PEI, but what I had said in my earlier remarks was that when the National Housing Strategy was launched, there was 225 million identified for urban Indigenous housing needs. How that's being delivered is 200 million is being delivered through the Canada Community Housing Initiative through bilateral agreements with each province and territory where there are existing units under provincial administration. There's 25 million set aside in the National Housing Co-Investment Fund that I also spoke about today, targeted towards the needs of the existing community housing stock serving urban Indigenous families. Focus on preserving affordability and ensuring that this housing stock remains in good condition or can be restored to a good condition to meet the needs of Indigenous households. So 225 overall, 200 delivered by provinces and territories where the majority of the stock is administered, and then 25 million within co-investment for projects that are federally administered.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Lindsay. All right, seeing as we're coming up on 3 o'clock, we have no other questions. Again, thank you all for joining us and presenting to the caucus. I know, like I said, really appreciate any time that we have the opportunity to sit down and hear what CMHC is doing. So thank you all once again. And then thank you everybody for joining in. We will share the webinar with the rest of the caucus within the week, so everybody can have access to it. And I'm assuming if we get any more questions, Lindsay, that we should forward them to you folks.
Absolutely, and as Alison indicated, we will follow up with written responses for any of the questions we couldn't answer today.
All right, perfect. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Yeah, thank you so much, and please invite us back sometime. We're happy to participate at any time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.